The last thing we're going to talk about today is, the main interview. We talked about the legal side of the New Mexico um, governor's emergency order banning. It's basically suspending gun carry rights, at least in Albuquerque and the surrounding county. But I wanted to talk a little bit with you about your piece. You have an analysis piece for members that looks at the politics of this situation. So what's your basic thesis here?
Yeah, so I think the politics of this one in particular are fascinating. This kind of ties back to our discussion about Philadelphia and the preemption battles. It's not an uncommon thing to see left-leaning or progressive or however you want to phrase it, gun control supporting politicians, whether they're at the local level or the state level, really push the envelope when they enact some sweeping gun policy. So, for example, Philadelphia all the time tries to pass its own either carry restrictions or assault weapon bans or what have you, even though state law explicitly prohibits them from doing so. And they know they lose in court all the time, but they do it anyway because it's a very progressive city. The Democratic city council or the mayor or whatever who enacts these policies isn't going to get punished for doing so. So it becomes a political victory for them. Same thing with California and New Jersey when they pass these Bruin response bills that have been enjoined several times by federal judges, but it doesn't matter because to their voters, it looks like they're doing something for gun violence. And what I found fascinating in this case is you have a Democratic governor in a reliably blue state, New Mexico, doing something similar, a very out there gun policies, taking a bold stand against gun violence in Albuquerque. But instead of praise, she's received almost unanimous criticism from even members of her own party. You've seen her own attorney general say that he's not going to defend her in court. Letters have come. That's huge, right? That's huge. Yeah. And both chambers of the legislature, there's been lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers, that have issued letters and public statements saying that what she's doing is unconstitutional and they can't support it and that she should rescind it. You have national gun control figures like David Hogg from March for Our Lives. You have the Democratic representative from California, Ted Lieu, calling her unconstitutional, what she's doing unconstitutional. So I think it's definitely a turning point where there seems to be at least a limit to what these sort of antagonistic, quasi-performative gun control measures. And clearly, Governor Lujan Grisham kind of hit the wall when it comes to where that limit is.
Yeah, it sure seems like it. They've really set the new floor, I think, for the gun debate because, especially the comments from like Hogg and Lieu, because they're effectively admitting that gun carry is protected in the Constitution. Now, look, this is something that the Supreme Court has explicitly said in Bruin. Like they said that, yes, the Second Amendment protects gun carry, but the gun control groups have by and large taken issue with that. And many of them are still of the opinion that the Second Amendment is a collective right. It doesn't really do much of anything, frankly. But, it kind of shows you where the debate has moved now, which is interesting, right? Because in the 60s, most of those groups that existed at the time were for banning handguns. That was the big push at the time. After, the Gun Control Act passed and you had some of these other gun control laws passed, they were having a lot of success. And the next thing they wanted to do was ban handguns. And that didn't happen and it became the new floor for a while. You couldn't ban handguns. It's extremely unpopular to try and ban handguns. Polling indicates it's, it's like a 70-30, 80-20 sort of issue. And so they gave up on that aspect and moved to other policies that they've been pursuing since then, assault weapons bans and universal background checks, things of that nature. And now, you're seeing a retreat, I think, strategically from May issue laws, right? That those were struck down in the Bruin case, which were effective bans on gun carry. I mean, outside of a very small fraction of applicants, most people couldn't actually obtain a permit to carry a gun in states that had that policy. And then now they've moved to shall issue. And so that's sort of the new floor for gun carry. Like they're still opposed to constitutional carry, right? Permitless carry. Constitutional carry is what advocates call it, obviously. And so they're still, you're at this point where they're, oh, excuse me, where they're at least willing to say that a total ban on gun carry, even for a limited period, because of an emergency order, is not something they can support. And that is a change, I think.
Yeah. No, that's a great point to make too, because not only is it just calling out sort of the performative nature of the policy itself, but it is an acknowledgement that, hey, even the gun control side acknowledges there is a right to carry, and it's not something you can violate. Because like you said, many of them, or at least some of the groups, want to relitigate Heller and all these other cases, but to see them publicly make statements saying that, look, there's a right to carry, you can't just toss that out the window on a whim. So it's pretty big. It
is. And, I think it also comes from sort of the hair thin nature of the order in the first place.
Sure.
This idea that there's an emergency in Albuquerque, New Mexico, that justifies this kind of suspension of rights there's not a lot of evidence behind that. The governor cites the murder of an 11-year-old, which is obviously horrendous, tragic thing. Unsolved murder, I would also note, is a road rage incident where, nobody knows who that person was. And certainly there isn't any evidence there's a connection to people who have concealed carry permits. And I would venture to guess that it's very unlikely that person who murdered an 11-year-old had a concealed carry permit. They don't, not that people with concealed carry permits, they're all perfect angels, but on average, they're much more law-abiding than the rest of the population, oftentimes even more than police, depending on the statistics that you're looking at. But at the same time, if you look at Albuquerque's own crime statistics that they've released, crime is way down. Murder, according to Albuquerque's police department, declined 21% in the first half of this year compared to the previous year. So the idea that there's a gun violence emergency runs counter to what the actual data says in the place where she's declared this. So there's not really a lot of justification to stand behind as to why this was necessary to do. She's kind of just saying it's sort of there to send a message. And I think threatening to arrest law-abiding people for carrying firearms for their own defense is not a great way to send a message to anyone. Right? It doesn't make any sense. You could already arrest criminals carrying guns because they can't, if they're a convicted felon or if they have a domestic violence misdemeanor, or they're underage, they can't carry guns anyway. It's already illegal. You can already arrest those people.
Right.
So it doesn't really send any message to them. It's just the whole situation very poorly thought through, it seems. And she didn't even do the footwork to see if her fellow Democrats in her own state were going to stand behind this. And clearly they haven't.